I'm Frank Newport, Gallup Editor-in-Chief.
I'm Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief of USA Today.
And welcome to Election Matters. Today, new data on what the American public wants to see happen relating to the debt talks, and Obama flip-flops on polls.
Plus, is smoking a wild card in 2012?
The debt ceiling, that's the big story. We have new polling out on the debt ceiling from the weekend, what Americans think about it. Where does it all come down in terms of what it means, I wonder, for next year's election?
You know, I don't think there's good news here for either side when it comes down to their election prospects, because what we find in the USA Today Gallup poll is that Americans take a very dim view about what's going on in Washington. We found that 4 out of 10 Americans said that the president and the Congress are doing the worst job in their lifetimes of trying to address the nation's problems.
But Obama does a little better, you have to give him credit, in the poll than Republicans or Democrats in Congress, right? When we ask that question, are these politicians looking out for their own political interest, or are they looking out for the interest of the country?
He did better, but even by doing better, it was only an even split between whether he was looking out for the nation's interest first or his own interest first. Still, that was a lot better than congressional Republicans. More than 7 out of 10 said congressional Republicans are really thinking about their own political prospects first.
I'm not cynical enough to say that Obama's paying attention to polls. We'll come back to that in a minute. But, you know, he's been emphasizing we need to compromise. And the polls showed, the American public says, we need to compromise. So that, to me, could suggest that he's positioning himself to come out better when this whole debt limit thing comes to an end.
Yeah, Americans say, 66% of Americans say they should make a compromise to get a deal, even if they have to accept some provisions that they don't like. Only 27% said, hang tough, don't make any compromises. And that 27%, I think, is more inclined to be Republicans and Democrats. We know that from before, from previous polling, that Democrats and independents more inclined to support compromise than hardcore Republicans.
Stick to the principles kind of thing, which is the whole picture we get now of these Tea Party freshman Congress people sleeping on their couches and really telling reporters we don't even care if we're reelected because we're interested in our grandchildren. So that makes, to me, the implications of our polling and all what's happening a little harder to fathom down the road, because you've got Republican leaders saying we don't care what the polling shows and we don't care what the implications are politically. We're doing what's right. What you just said, our data show, sticking to principles.
Right. And some of these freshman Tea Party Republicans were elected on this issue, promising that they would not vote to raise the debt ceiling, that they would really hold Washington's feet to the fire to reduce spending, and that's what they're intending to do now.
But it seems to me, all in all, if you look at our data as a whole, I would say there could be a slight tilt to Obama's side of the ledger. One is he scores a little better, although still pretty terrible, in terms of putting the country's interests first. And second, the American public taken as a whole, when you put them all together, want compromise, not sticking to principles. And that's what he's been saying.
Yeah, you'd think that. But clearly a risky path ahead for both sides. And the risk for Obama, not only if he doesn't look like he's compromising, but also if he fails to get a deal and it has a terrible impact on the economy that we expect, that would be very serious for an incumbent president who hopes to win a second term.
Yeah, I saw one website where they were saying, you know, if the country defaults and the economy's horrible, that's better for the Republicans because an incumbent president never gets reelected if the economy's terrible. I don't think the Republicans are thinking that, but we know confidence in the economy is pretty terrible already.
Yeah. Of course, Republicans do control the House of Representatives, so some shared responsibility there. And if the economy, if we slip into a second recession, a double-dip recession, it's hard to believe that's going to be good for incumbents of either party.
President Obama and polls. Last week, Susan, on our show, we used a clip of President Obama saying, you know, we can't pay that much attention to polls because the public's too busy doing other things. They don't really know what's going on. Well, Friday, he held another press conference, and listen to this.
You have 80% of the American people who support a balanced approach. 80% of the American people support an approach that includes revenues and includes cuts.
Certainly quoting polls there, 80%. He even got a precise number. By the way, that number is not right. He was quoting a Gallup poll. People asked him later, and the White House said, yes, that was a Gallup poll. It's not really 80%, although generally he was in the right ballpark. But boy, now he's saying, let's listen to the public. Pay attention to polls.
I would say in all the years I've covered the White House that presidents quote polls when they're in their favor, and they tend to ignore polls or dismiss polls when they're looking bad.
You're not saying politicians are self-serving, are you? Inside any political apparatus, they're paying attention to polls. That's true, right? Is it not?
It is true. A lot of attention to polls, although often they don't want to admit it because it looks like they've got their finger in the wind.
Although I think that's probably a good thing if they had their finger in the wind of public opinion. Speaking of the election, the Republican side of the ledger still confusing to me. We have new poll data, haven't even released it yet, showing that Rick Perry, governor of Texas, is known by less than 6 out of 10 Republicans, so he doesn't have universal name ID. But boy, among those who know him, he's right up there with Michelle Bachmann and just a little behind Herman Cain as having the highest positive intensity of anybody we look at. So he looks like he could be a factor if he jumps in, cowboy boots and all.
There clearly seems to be an opening for Governor Perry if he chooses to get in. And, you know, he's been an ally of Sarah Palin. Some thought that Sarah Palin would endorse him if he got in. That might mix up the field even more.
Rudy Giuliani, high name ID, obviously, up there with Newt Gingrich and Mitt Romney and the others. And his positive intensity for all Republicans is actually not that bad. It's up there where Sarah Palin's is. But does that mean Rudy Giuliani would have a chance if he decides to get in?
You know, I think unlike Rick Perry, it's hard to take Rudy Giuliani seriously as a Republican nominee. He's too at odds with the base of his party. He supports abortion rights. He supports gay rights. I think a lot of Republicans respect him for his work in New York City after the 9/11 attacks. It's hard for me to picture, though, him getting nominated.
Although, look at the data again. He certainly, just if you put them all together, the people who know Rudy Giuliani like him as much as the people, on net average, as the people who like Sarah Palin, and almost as much as Rick Perry.
I'd take that bet.
All right, we'll see what happens. We don't know what either of them are going to do. Susan, you were a White House correspondent for a long time, were you not?
I was.
Does President Barack Obama smoke?
President Obama says he has sought to quit smoking. He doesn't usually speak in totally categorical terms when he's asked that question. We know that Michelle Obama, who's very health conscious, doesn't want him to keep smoking. There is some suspicion, rumors, not confirmed, that the golf course might be a place where he occasionally has a cigarette.
And no question, Speaker of the House John Boehner smokes.
Oh, and unashamedly. He doesn't pretend that he's trying to quit.
Well, we're not just asking this for general reasons, but we just did a poll, a Gallup poll, our annual July update, and we found that 25%, 1 out of 4 Americans, say that they respect people who smoke less. So this could be an issue in next year's election, right?
Isn't that interesting how that reflects changing societal attitudes toward smoking in just, the past decade or two?
Yeah, it could. It was 14% back in the 90s, but now it's up to 1 out of 4 Americans.
That's a significant number.
Yeah, I doubt smoking will be an issue, but we'll wait and see what happens. Do we know of any other Republican candidates who smoke?
No other Republican candidate smokes openly.
All right, as far as we know. I'm Frank Newport, Gallup Editor-in-Chief.
And I'm Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief of USA Today.
And this has been Election Matters.